Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jody Monroe, the superintendent, and I want to introduce the panelists who are here before I begin our presentation. I know some people are still joining us, but we'll get started. Mike Klugman, the middle school principal, will be here with us today. Dave Domel, the high school principal, is here. Joellen Gardner, our communications specialist. Laura Heffernan, principal at Glenmont. Dave Hurst, the assistant superintendent for instructional programs. Dave Rounds, high school teacher and BCTA president. Joanne Menrath, our school nurse coordinator. And I see Kelly there, but I don't see Kelly. Kelly Ward is an elementary teacher at Slingerlands and the vice president of the BCTA. So I am going to share my screen. And can everyone, can you see that? Yep. Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, so I want to quickly go through the highlights of our reopening plan. Certainly when we have been working on this, we keep in mind our mission statement and our core values of academic character, community, and wellness. So as I mentioned, I'm going to do an overview of the reopening plan. If you have questions as I'm going through the presentation, if you could please enter those in the Q&A. We will try and get to as many questions as possible. We are putting together overall a general FAQ that we can share out with the community following all the parent forums. So we are still awaiting a final decision by Governor Cuomo. He indicated that he will make a final decision about schools reopening this week. We did submit our plan in combination that was in conjunction with the Department of Health and the New York State Education Department. We are proposing a hybrid model with a remote learning option for all students. So that would include a remote and in-person instruction. We did prioritize in-person instruction for our youngest learners and students who have additional needs, and we will be providing family with a choice of remote learning only. The governor did say on July 13th that schools would be open if the infection rate was 5% or lower on a 14-day average, and would be closed if that infection rate rose above 9% or higher on a 7-day average. Health and safety is our top priority, as I'm sure it is our families as well. So we will be requiring daily health checks for all of our students and staff. We will be requiring that face coverings be worn that cover both the nose and mouth, that would be worn in school buildings and on school grounds and on school buses where social distancing isn't always an option. We are planning on 6 feet social distancing in all directions in our classrooms and on school grounds. There are some areas, physical education, choir, and band, that require 12 feet social distancing in all directions. And as much as possible on the school bus, we're looking at about a 50% capacity. This gives you an idea of what the classrooms will be set up like. So you can see these are desks, all facing the same direction with 6 foot social distancing, with the teacher in the front. So the purpose of wearing masks and social distancing is that it presents a better safety measure. And when teachers or students do have to get up and move around the classroom, they're not always at 6 feet social distancing. We will be allowing mask breaks periodically through the day at meal times. And there are some students who we realize are not medically able to tolerate a face covering. I mentioned the health screenings daily. We will be asking our families to do daily temperature checks and not report to school if the temperature rises above 100 degrees. Staff will complete and submit the health screening that follows the CDC guidance. And again, we'd be asking families to complete this prior to the start of the school day or prior to the start of the school, students getting on the buses. These would be submitted to the school health offices. There will be no visitors allowed on school campus unless there's a safety issue or well-being of a student. Parents and guardians, we will be asking to pick up and drop off their child outside if they need to do so during the school day. Any visitors who do need to come on campus will be required to wear a mask and follow all safety procedures that are in place. Some additional health and safety measures, PPE. Students and staff will be encouraged to wear face coverings, as I've mentioned. We'll certainly maintain a supply of disposable PPE, which would include face masks, gloves, goggles, face shields, or gowns for any student or staff who needs it. We are encouraging frequent hand washing, and we will review appropriate hand washing with all students. Hand sanitizing will also be encouraged. We do plan to install hand sanitizers in every classroom in all common areas in the event that hand washing is not an option. Our operations and maintenance staff have been trained in daily cleaning practices as well as specialized and responsive cleaning. They will be cleaning high touch points several times a day, and teachers will be assisting in disinfecting classrooms, particularly the desk in between different groups of students. Some high touch points that we will be cleaning more frequently, bathrooms, the health offices, isolation rooms, any frequently touched surfaces that are in common areas, cafeterias and kitchens, classrooms, buses and school vehicles. And as I mentioned, the desks will be cleaned in between different cohorts of students by our staff. Some of our health and safety continued priorities. All staff will be trained on how to spot signs and symptoms of COVID. The staff who are currently working this summer all completed the training. Anyone who does present with symptoms would be directed to the building nurse, where we do have a separate isolation area if the school nurse feels that that's an appropriate location for the student or staff member to go to evaluate. One of the things that we are required to do as part of our plans is to be able to work with the Department of Health in contact tracing. So when we're notified of a staff member or student or visitor who has a confirmed case of COVID, we would collaborate with the Department of Health to help in their response to include contact tracing. Some other strategies we have in place, I already mentioned social distancing, which will limit the capacity in buildings. Bus capacity is about at 50%. We are looking at staggering arrival and dismissal times for our students. Also, ventilation, that is a recommendation that we increase the flow of outdoor air. So in order to do that, we do have a system that allows us to increase the airflow to approximately 22%. Some other strategies we have in place is the use of clear plastics. We have some of those installed in our office areas currently. We also have some available for teaching stations when students and staff have to work in a more close proximity. So what happens when a student or a staff member has symptoms of COVID in school? So we do require temperature checks and screenings daily. However, if a student or a staff member presents with symptoms or signs, we would be contacting the school nurse, who would again escort the student to or staff to an isolation area where they could be picked up, and we would refer students or staff to contact their healthcare providers. If a student or staff member tests positive, as I already mentioned, we would work closely with the Department of Health to determine the location of the student or staff member throughout the school day, and they would follow up with the individuals to do additional contact tracing. DOH, the Department of Health, would work with us to determine if a building needed to be closed down. We would collaborate with them, or if other staff or students needed to be quarantined for any designated time. So as I mentioned, we are proposing a hybrid model for instruction to begin the fall. Families will have a choice, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what we're planning on currently is 5 days a week with full day in-person instruction for our students in grades K through 6. our special education and intensive skills students in K through 12, our E&L students K through 12, and perhaps our CTE students at the high school. Our 7 through 12 students with social distancing would be reduced to about a 50% capacity. So we're looking to have the alphabet letters, last name A through K on A days and L through Z on B days. On the days that students are not in class on site, they would be logging in from home to participate in the day's lessons and activities. So to begin the school year, this is still in draft form, but what we're planning currently, Monday is Labor Day. We do actually have 2 staff days the prior week for superintendent's conference days and professional development. On Tuesday, September 8th, that would be a conference day as well, so we can make sure that our staff receive any additional professional development that's needed and to prepare for the school year. On Wednesday through Friday, this would be for all students K-12. We would begin the year with virtual instruction for those 3 days. This would also be a time where elementary students could be scheduled to come to the building and drop off their school supplies and meet with their teachers. And 6th grade potentially could have some type of an orientation in the middle school. The following week, we would plan to have all students letters A through K on site, and L through Z would be in a remote mode. So that means those students who are at home would log in on Monday the 14th to participate in activities within the classroom. On Tuesday, we would have a similar model where A through K would be in remote instruction and L through Z would be on site. Again, A through K would log in to participate remotely in instruction. And beginning Wednesday, September 16th, all students K-6 would be on site, and 7 through 12 would continue their A-B day rotation as planned. The start times, we have changed the high school start time. All of the other levels remain the same, so you can see the difference for grades 9 through 12 here. And I mentioned that we are looking potentially at some staggered start and pickup times, and this is really to ease congestion of not only of traffic, but also of students going in and out of the building at any one location in one time. So this will be a work in progress as we begin the school year, but we're thinking at the elementary schools, the parents would drop off, parent drop off would be scheduled after the buses, and pickup would occur prior to the buses so that traffic would be reduced. Less students would be entering and exiting the building at the same time. In the middle school, we're asking parents not to drop off prior to 8 a.m. And again, dismissal would be staggered by grade levels or areas of the building. In the high school, students were asking to not be dropped off or arrive prior to 7:45 because students will need to report directly to their period 1 class. And at the end of the day, we're looking at students being dismissed by wings of the building. We will have before and after school care still through Schools Out at all of our 5 elementary buildings. And in grades K through 5, those students, we are planning to have them on site every day with social distancing in classrooms. We are reassigning our RTI math teachers to pick up additional class sections, which will reduce the overall class size and also provide more direct support and instruction for all students. Special areas such as art, library, music, and PE will primarily be push-in models, and choir will not be offered at the beginning of the year. Also, sharing of materials and supplies will not be permitted or, when necessary, limited and disinfected between use. Movement and mask breaks will be built into the school day. We have a subcommittee currently working on recess to come up with supervised activities with appropriate social distancing. Lunches will be served in the classrooms, and staff will be encouraged to use outdoor space to the extent possible. We are offering an option for remote learning for families in grades K through 5. This is available to families who choose not to send their children for in-person instruction because they have health or safety concerns. This would be a mix of video conferencing lessons that could be provided by our faculty via Google Meet or Zoom, and also independent learning activities, which would be supported by online tools. We're currently still working out the different models, but in one model, since all available teaching faculty have been assigned to in-person duties in order to follow the guidelines, the teacher contact time would be somewhat limited. If there's a large number of families who opt for a remote learning option, Model 2, which I'll talk about in a minute, could be available if there's a number of in-person class sections that could be safely reduced. Again, I do want to stress that both of these models are still preliminary, and we are still working out some of the logistics of a virtual model. It could be a combination of either of these. So in Model 1, where we do have all of our staff assigned to instruct in-person students, we would ask that the students who are at home would log in to their morning meeting at 9 o'clock, and for about 45 minutes to an hour, they would participate in the class with their classmates, doing the morning meeting, perhaps a read aloud. Their schedule, obviously this could vary by what works for students' home structure. We would look to use some of the Teachers College video lessons in iReady, which are aligned with our curriculum we would be offering on-site. Also the math, we would look to use potentially some Khan Academy videos in combination with iReady. And for special areas in science and social studies, we would have pre-recorded video lessons, again, aligned with our curriculum on site. In Model 2, again, I want to stress this is just a potential. If we had enough students opt in where we could reduce sections at the buildings, we could look at having, again, the morning meeting time and students logging in from home. And then we would look to add small group Google Meets or Zooms for students throughout the day. And you can see there would be special area instruction that would also be woven in throughout the day with teachers offering some instruction through Google Meet or Zoom, or potentially pre-recorded lessons. I've mentioned social distancing a lot, and this was one of the things we had to look at to determine what our capacity is. This essentially gives you an idea of our classroom sizes with the number of students that can reasonably fit within these spaces. So our elementary enrollment, when we were planning for this coming fall, originally this is what our sectioning looked like with the number of students and the number of sections at each building. By adding the RTI teachers who teach math, you can see that this creates 9 additional sections across our elementary schools, which then reduces the number of students in any one class. So when you look at the original ratio compared to the ratios with the RTI teachers, you can see that there's a significant decrease of students in our sections where we were able to add the RTI teachers. In grade 6, I mentioned that we are planning to have our grade 6 students in every day with social distancing. We will be changing the schedule in grade 6, however, where it will follow more of an elementary model. So teachers would still teach by content area, but students would be scheduled pretty much in a similar cohort, and the teacher would move to those students throughout the day. World language would not be offered, so that teachers can co-teach with content area teachers to lower class sizes and provide more direct support for students. And the special areas would be scheduled similar to the elementary model, where students have library, music, and art once a week and PE twice a week. PE, choir, and band do require 12-foot distancing. So this would limit the activities and the scheduling of students in these classes. So to adhere to the 12-foot restriction, the classes will be delivered in a different manner. Lunches would be served in 3 large areas with 6-foot distancing, and staff would be encouraged, again, to use outdoor space to the extent possible. If a family of a grade 6 student chooses a remote option, students would follow the assigned schedule, and they would receive live instruction in each of the core subject areas. And then students would receive their non-core instruction through pre-recorded videos and assigned tasks. In grades 7 through 12, we are, as I mentioned, planning an alternating day schedule. So the school day would follow for grades 7 and 8, the 9-period day, and an 8-period day for grades 9 through 12. Again, PE, choir, and band would still require the 12-foot distancing. Sharing of materials and supplies will not be allowed or will be limited. And students will be assigned to a classroom every period, which mainly applies to home base at the middle school and high school, where students will be assigned a classroom and they will pretty much have to stay within that classroom during those given periods. Also, high school students who in the past were able to leave school for a period of time and come back, that will not be permitted this year as well. So just to give you an idea of how a hybrid lesson might look, this is very similar to what you would see in any of our classrooms currently. So this is just a sample. Obviously, every content area is a little bit different, and every level looks a little bit differently. Oops. So what could happen is there's in-person students, which would be more of a lecture style. Students who are home would log in either through Google Meet or Zoom at the beginning of the period. The teacher would take attendance, and then they would remain connected for that 40-minute period and take part in the class discussion. Another model that is used frequently in our buildings is the teacher may do an opening or a welcome or introduction to a topic. Students would, again, who are from home, would log in. This teacher would take attendance. They would participate in that lesson opening. They may stay on Google Meet or Zoom, depending upon what the teacher directs them to do. And they would continue the independent work or perhaps a partner activity. They would then come back and have a lesson closing for about 10 minutes, and they may have some time to complete some homework or conclude the class. Another model that is frequently used in our buildings is a whole class lesson with independent work. So in this situation, students who are on site and students who are home would log in with the teacher. The teacher would provide a whole class lesson of about 20 minutes, and then there would be independent work following that. Remote students could work on the same or similar tasks and then would have to submit their work via Google Classroom that day or when the teacher designates. And another potential lesson framework could be that in-person students received instruction directly from the teacher, where students who are at home would, again, still log into the classroom, attendance would be taken, the teacher would make sure they knew what their assignment was, and they could potentially do their in-person work or their independent work at home and submit it either at the end of the period or later time frame. So this just gives you a visual of what a classroom may look like. You have the participants from home on the left side of the screen, where you can see the teacher is presenting a PowerPoint, and there are students at home who have logged in and are participating in the instruction. And then students who are seated in the classroom who can see their classmates at home, as well as the teacher, and can also respond and participate in the class discussion. Again, this is a family choice. If families opt to do a remote option, students will follow the assigned schedule and they would receive live instruction in all subjects except physical education. Students may receive phys ed through pre-recorded videos and assigned tasks dependent upon in-person class activity. And I know there's some questions about special education students and what their services look like. So for related services, any students who get services such as speech OT, we would look at either a push-in model, if that's appropriate, or whatever the IEP specifies, or it could also be in a pull-out model, If it's in a pull-out model, the students would have to be pulled out from the same cohort of students when they're being scheduled. In 7 through 12, this schedule could also happen during a student who may be assigned a study hall, or at the middle school, perhaps even home base. In that 7 through 12 could also receive those services if relevant when they're at home virtually. Resource room would be clustered in cohorts. In the middle school, they would be scheduled in one of the 8 periods, and in grades 7 through 12, they would follow the alternating day schedule. Same for the co-teach students or DCT students. They would also follow the alternating day model and receive their co-teach services on site in K through 6. All of our skills and intensive skills students would be on site K through 12 daily. And to clarify, there's been some questions about what's the difference if I participate in remote learning or I homeschool my child. So remote learning is a choice. Students would remain a Bethlehem students. They would follow a similar educational path, and the curriculum would be aligned closely to what their classmates are receiving in person. Remote learning would be a blend of real-time daily connections and also self-directed works. And when the student is able to return to the classroom, there would be limited curriculum gaps and more familiarity with the curriculum. Homeschooling, the student is no longer a Bethlehem student. The curriculum is determined by the parents, and parents are required to create an individual home instruction plan and also provide the district with quarterly reports on student progress. Students are primarily taught by their parents or frequently an independent purchased online curriculum. And there are more challenges in returning to the classroom simply because the curriculum does not necessarily align with the Bethlehem curriculum. So what are we hoping to get from parents? We need to know for our planning how many families might opt for a remote option versus planning the hybrid model, which we're proposing for students. We will be sending information out to families tomorrow with information about the remote options, and we would ask that families, if they could make a decision by August 15th, in order for us to plan for how many students will be on site and how many students will want to participate in a remote option. So some of the guidelines is if you opt for remote learning, that we are setting this up by quarters. So if you opt for remote learning, that you would remain in a remote option through the end of the first quarter for the secondary, which is November 13th. Transitions from remote learning to face-to-face need to occur at the end of the quarter for safety and social distancing requirements that we need to adhere to. It would be expected that students would still be responsible for participating in all the district assessments and testing that's required by state education department. Students would not be able to attend school events and activities should they happen, in any other school gathering in which there might be a risk of contracting COVID. I understand also that students will need to be accountable for attendance in course grades during remote learning, making sure that they're completing assignments in a timely manner. They need to log in at the beginning of every day in all the classes. They would be required to participate in any online discussions and virtual meetings. So this is something similar to what you'll receive tomorrow about some of the remote options that are available. In regards to co-curricular activities, fall sports have been delayed until September 21st. If they're permitted, we will follow any guidance that's given to us by the Department of Health and State Education Department. We are looking to offer some co-curricular activities that will be allowed virtually and safely. Students who are in a remote environment could participate in virtual activities. And there will be no after-school buses to begin the school year. In transportation, we are encouraging parents, if they're able, to transport their child. We understand this is not always possible, so students and staff would be wearing acceptable face coverings at all times on school buses. and maintain as much social distancing as possible. Students would be assigned a seat, and members of the same household can sit together, and students are not permitted to alter from their scheduled morning and afternoon routes. This just gives you a visual of what a school bus may look like with 50% capacity, siblings sitting together. Buses would be loading from the back to the front, and they would unload from front to the back for proper safety protocols. So some questions that have come up that have been frequent. What types of face coverings are recommended or acceptable? We will be providing further guidance to families and staff about this, but they're not limited. Face coverings that are acceptable are cloth-based face coverings. Homemade masks are acceptable, bandana-style mask, and surgical masks. Face coverings must cover both the mouth and the nose, and clear face shields without a mask do not meet the CDC guidelines. How often will the school bathrooms be cleaned and sanitized? They will be cleaned and sanitized at least 3 times a day. If a family doesn't complete the daily health questionnaire, we understand that things are busy in the morning and there may be times where that you forget to do it. We would be contacting the family to help them, remind them that this does need to be completed daily. It is a health and safety measure that we believe is important. However, if this is a continuous problem, that we would be asking students to enroll in the remote learning option. If remote learning is a family's choice, will Chromebooks be provided? We will be providing Chromebooks to all students. So this is not the case, however, if a family chooses to homeschool a student instead of the remote option. But all students will receive a Chromebook, and we will be arranging pickup time prior to the start of school, similar to what we did in the spring. In the phase reentry, students will be in remote learning for the first several days. So when will they receive their Chromebooks? As I mentioned, we will be providing pickup time similar to what we did this last spring. If there's a significant number of children whose parents elect for remote learning, would there be an adjustment to the platform? So if we do have a large number of families and we're able to reduce sections and still maintain safety and social distancing in all of our buildings, the virtual instruction could change from Model 1 to 2, as I explained, or a combination of that. We won't know exactly how that might work until we determine how many families opt for remote learning option. If a K-5 student who enrolls in remote learning but chooses to return to in-person instruction may not be assigned to their home school. So due to social distancing and the assignment of staff to in-person and virtual classrooms, if a student does at some point during the year on the quarters decide they want to return to in-person schooling, they may have to be assigned to another elementary school than their home school if they're at maximum capacity and we can't have the student in their home school safely. Will students identified as needing reading and math services get RTI support? So the RTI math teachers are being reassigned for regular classrooms. Reading specialists are still available. However, given the size of the classrooms with the number of students now, which range from 15 to 18, there should be only 1 or 2 students in every classroom who potentially need math support, and the support can be provided by the classroom teacher. Will students receive related services through SES? Will they receive them when school resumes? Yes, we do plan to provide students who receive related services. Again, as I mentioned, that could be through a push-in model or a pull-out model with cohorts of students, but we would meet each student's IEP. We are planning for outdoor learning spaces. We're looking at getting tents for covered areas at all of our buildings. We're also looking at other locations around the outside of the building that we could use, of course, weather permitting, but that is the goal. Ventilation, we do, as I mentioned, have a pretty robust air circulation system already. Teachers and staff are encouraged to open windows and doors when safe to do so. And we will make sure that we're maintaining adequate ventilation under the guidance of the Department of Health. We do work closely with BCSD, who we work with, their health and safety group, who also helps with guidance in this particular area. Students do not have to bring lunches from home. We will be offering purchased lunches. We'll be doing so through a pre-order lunch process. Families will be encouraged to use My School Bucks to pay for lunch. As I mentioned, students in K-5 would eat in their classroom. In the middle and high school would eat in several large spaces in the building. If students are enrolled in remote learning, we will still have breakfast and lunch options available. And for high school students who some don't have a lunch period, we are making accommodations to make sure that they're able to eat during their day. Students cannot sit with a friend on the bus, even if it's someone they have spent time together during the summer. Siblings or members of the same household will sit together, and the seats will be assigned. Social distancing on buses cannot be maintained due to the fact that students are getting on and off the buses. So that's why we're requiring everyone to wear masks, and once seated, they need to remain in their seat. The state guidance recommends social distancing to the extent practical on buses, and again, requires all staff and students to wear face coverings. So this is the second of our family forum. We have another one scheduled for tomorrow morning. The middle and high school are planning on some student forums in the coming weeks, as well as our K-5 buildings are going to also be offering sessions for families and new students. So that is the close of the presentation. So I want to stop sharing my screen. If I can do that. Maybe I can do that. Hang on a second, sorry. I'm having problems, hang on. Having technical difficulties. Oh, there we go, I got it. Okay, so thank you for that. And Joellen, I'm guessing we have some questions from our participants.
We do. We have quite a few. So I see some of our panelists have been answering some questions along the way, but I'm just going to start throwing out some questions, Jody, and I guess the questions you can answer. You'll be able to do that, and you can assign one of the other panelists maybe to answer some of these questions. And I know we have a bunch for Joanne Menrath, and so anyway, so let's get going. So you talked a little bit about arrival and dismissal, saying some of those plans were a work in progress. When do you think maybe there'll be more information about what some of the arrival and dismissals will look like, and will social distancing be enforced during those times, and how?
So we plan to, the first few days of school when we are in remote instruction, well, let me go back. Prior to the start of the school year, we do plan to send some materials home and ask parents to begin having some of these discussions with their children in advance, kind of getting them used to what some of the changes will look like. And then those first few days where everyone is in virtual instruction, one of our goals is to be able to have our staff work with our students on social distancing, wearing face coverings, what does lunch look like? What does recess look like? What do the hallways look like? So that is one of our goals those first few days. When we do arrival and dismissal, I'll just take the elementary level, and then Laura, if you want to add on, I know you've had further discussions specifically at Glenmont. We're looking at perhaps a window of about 20 minutes that's opposite the buses. So for example, if we take the alphabet, let's say, and say A through K parents would drop their kids off within this, 10-minute window, L through Z, and then try and stagger that so it's not at the same drop-off time as buses. We also are looking at using different entrances so that not all students are going in one entrance at any one time. So a lot of our elementary schools do have doors that directly go to the outside. So it is possible, if it's safe, that students could go from the bus, let's say, or from the car to right directly into that classroom without having to go into the hallways at all. So same thing for pickup. We would be looking at staggering the parent time from 15 to 20 minutes. Again, this is going to depend upon how many parents are able to get in the parking lot, drop off, and get out. So those times will probably need to be adjusted slightly. Who knows, maybe we'll be really efficient. So that's kind of the plan. But Laura, do you want to just talk about the plan at Glenmont to give people a maybe more specific idea of what that might look like?
Sure, you explained it pretty well. For example, at 9:10, the buses would, as soon as a bus arrives, the children will disembark from the bus. Usually we used to hold them, but we're going to have them go directly to their classrooms. And as you explained, our 3 through 5 classrooms, grades 3 through 5, they can enter the school from, or they go around the corner of the school and they can enter through their individual classroom doors. So that will be really helpful. Although we don't have walkers and bikers at Glenmont, I know some of the other schools were talking about how they were going to accommodate those students and work with families and educating the children and how to social distance as they walk home, for example. So we're having lots of conversations, and you'll be hearing more from us too about how to prepare your children.
Great, thanks.
So Jody, maybe you could clarify, you spoke a little a few minutes ago about if a K-5 student begins in remote learning only and wants to return to in-person instruction, how is that when they go back to their home school? How is that affected? And I believe you said that there would have to be space in the home school. But if you could just clarify that a little, and whether or not if a K-5 student chooses that remote learning for the whole year, will they be able to return to their home school next year?
Sure. So a situation I can think of where there may not be a space. So let's say I'm just going to take a grade level, a third grader their family opts to start the year in remote learning. And so at the mid-year point, they decide they want to return to an on-site program. It is possible because that we have a student who was registered during the school year and is now in that third grade section, because I'll use Glenmont, that's their home school. In which case, if those third grade classes at Glenmont didn't have capacity for social distancing, we likely could accommodate the student to return to one of our other elementary schools, because we do have, I think, capacity in all of our buildings at some point. But that's a situation where potentially there would not be a space that we could maintain 6-foot distancing if a child opted to return, at a point during the year. If in fact, through the following year, if someone opted to stay in remote learning for the entire year, we do plan for students. We have students who end up at different elementary schools every year because kids move in at different times. But we do make a plan that all students will begin the year in their home school, unless there's other situations why they would not.
Okay. All right. I have a few questions for Joanne on health and safety. So what will be done if a student or faculty member in your child's class tests positive for COVID?
So if an individual tests positive for COVID, we would be in communication, as Jody mentioned, with the local health department, Albany County. And we also would be in communication with our school physician And they would help us determine what course of action needs to happen, what strategies do we have to put in place, what communications do we do with our families. They will provide us with direction on what we would need to do if there's possible closure, where it could be 24 hours up to 2 to 5 days or longer, depending upon the situation. But that will give them time to assess it and get a better understanding of the situation and how it might impact the greater school community. And it will allow our custodial staff to provide cleaning and disinfection. So we would then work with the Department of Health on any contact tracing. As Jody had mentioned as well, it is a public health function, but they need our assistance so they know who that individual might have been exposed to in the school setting. And the one thing that I think is difficult for, I think, everyone to know is that we're not able, due to confidentiality laws, we have to protect the individual, their information. Communication with families and close contacts would be happening from the health department to those close contacts. They would be contacting you as a family or as a staff member regarding their possible exposure to determine if you were in fact a close contact and might need to quarantine.
Okay, I have another. So say if my child has a cold, do they get tested for the virus before they can come back?
No, it's a really good question in the sense because I know it's a frequent question that people are asking, because if you look at the list of symptoms of COVID, they are also common with many other childhood illnesses, like the common cold, like the flu, like seasonal allergies. In fact, if you go on CDC's website, they have a really nice table that is relatively new where it compares the symptoms of COVID with strep throat, with the common cold, with the flu, with asthma, with seasonal allergies. And you'll see how all the different symptoms kind of line up with those other conditions. So there's definitely an overlap of symptoms between COVID-19 and other common illnesses. And so if a child presents with a cold symptom as this parent is describing, we look, for example, at school. If a child is sent to the health office, we developed an assessment tool that would look at the symptoms of illness. There's 11 different symptoms, and that list seems to grow or change as we go forward. But in addition to looking at the symptom, we will also be looking at, does the child have a fever? Does the child have symptoms of a lower respiratory infection that is often common with COVID, like the cough, the shortness of breath? Have they had contact with others who have been ill? And if the answer is yes to that, then we would say to the parent, we would recommend that you contact your child's provider and discuss with them your child's condition and to see about a possible test. It is up to the healthcare provider to make that determination whether your child will need to have a test. It will not be up to the school district.
Okay, and while we have you, Joanne, can you describe what types of masks are recommended and whether or not clear face shields can be used as a substitute for masks?
Okay, so face coverings have to be thought of as being part of a package. They're just not all by themselves. They should be combined with other infection prevention measures, such as the frequent hand washing, the social physical distancing, respiratory etiquette, because we know that face coverings don't provide protection on their own. And so, as Jody mentioned, acceptable face coverings will include cloth-based face coverings. We will be providing some guidance. There's a lot of information out there. You can see that a number of cloth face coverings are made from a variety of different fabrics and different layers. But interestingly, few of them have had any sort of, evaluation or studies done on them. There's no single design that's recommended. There's no single choice of material. I mean, again, people are looking at what is out there. So we're trying to gather some information for staff as well as for students and for families. And we're working with our school physician on that, as well as getting some input from DOH. And certainly there's information out there from CDC that says, and DOH's requirements are that they should completely cover both the mouth and the nose. They should fit snugly, but comfortably along the sides of the face. They should be secured with ties or loops. And it is recommended that they be multiple layers of fabric. Our school physician recommends 3 tightly woven layers of fabric. And so again, we're looking at that a little bit more. But we also have to make sure that the face coverings allow for breathing without restriction, obviously, and that they can be washed and machine dried, cleaned without damage or change to the face covering themselves. Although, you know, the DOH and I believe also CDC does support bandana mask, as Jody had mentioned. There is some concern that our school physician has regarding those because they may not be enough of a covering. So again, we're trying to put all of that together for you to provide some guidance that will help you in your selection.
All right, thanks, Joanne. So still on face coverings, and I don't know who would answer this. What happens when a student refuses to wear a face covering?
So I can address that. I know that's come up a couple different times, and I think we want to really work with the child and the family to figure out why a student, you know, doesn't want to wear a face covering. You know, there's lots of different reasons, especially as kids go through different ages, why they would not want to wear a face covering. So hopefully through education, we can certainly emphasize the importance of health and safety of not only them, but others. So we'd like to look at it more of an educational piece and be able to work with the family so that the child is not continuing to not want to wear a face covering. If it becomes an issue where the student just refuses to wear one and there's no medical condition that would support why they should not, that then becomes a health and safety concern. And we do have a remote learning option available. So we would then have this child participate in remote learning because we can't have the health and safety of others jeopardized because of that.
Excuse me, Joellen, I just want to go back. I remember one part of the initial question had to do with face shields. You know, the CDC does not recommend the use of face shields as a substitute for masks, so we will not be supporting them to be used by themselves. They can be used along with a face covering, but not on their own.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. So in the high school, and I know this was answered, I think, within the Q&A, but it's been repeated a couple of times. How will social distancing be maintained during class changes at the high school?
So Mr. Domel was just out in the hallway with his tape today, so I'll let him share that piece of information.
Sure. So when classes are dismissed, in the past, obviously the bell rings and students just go into the hallway. This year, when we get to the end of class, the students are going to be released by rows from the class to avoid great congestion. When they go out in the hallways, some hallways will be one way. Some hallways will be two ways. However, there will be markers in the hallways indicating arrows as to directional flow of traffic. There'll also be markers for spacing so that students can maintain spacing as they're walking down the hallways. And obviously we're going to have, you know, as many able bodies out there as possible at the change of classes to assist with this as well. So the stairways, I believe all the stairways we're going to try to have as one direction as much as possible. So it's not possible to make every hallway one way, but we're going to try to make as many as possible without cutting down on, you know, students not being able to get to their next class on time. So we're considering all that. We're actually mapping it out now. We're actually testing it ourselves, walking from class to class, different areas of the building. So that'll be the general idea of how it'll look.
Okay. Next, can you describe why there's no live streaming of classes in K-5?
Dave Hurst, do you want to address the options in
Sure.
K-5 and clarify maybe the live stream thing?
Yeah, so this is something we're still having ongoing conversations about, but by live streaming, I assume you mean the model that we're currently proposing for the secondary level, which essentially is the classroom teacher would have two devices running on their main board. They would have either Zoom or Google Meet running where all of the remote students would sort of appear on that screen so that they could interact with the class. And then the teacher would be using another device to actually do the presentation So that's how we'd be live streaming. We're not using distance learning technologies. We're not using robotic cameras like some colleges have. We're simply using Zoom or Google Meet logged on to separate devices at once. So as you can imagine, that's a lot to manage. And for grades 7 through 12, the students are much more self-sufficient. So the teacher is able to manage all of that and manage the students in front of them at the same time. We do not feel that that's necessarily the same case for K through 5, especially K2. If you always had 10 to 15 kindergartners in front of you, that's a challenge in and of itself. Trying to also manage students at home and the technology piece of it all simultaneously is just, we don't feel that that's an appropriate ask of our teachers, and we don't feel like that's an appropriate model for students, especially at the K2 level. We are still in discussions about the 3-5 level. As of right now, we're leaning towards, again, that we would not be streaming, but we're looking at options, possibly after the morning meeting, maybe we could stream just the live math lesson or just the ELA lesson. But simply trying to stream 6.5 straight hours of an elementary room is not developmentally appropriate, nor do we feel it's an effective model. So yes, we are still looking at options, but know that streaming for 6.5 straight hours is not an option that we're considering. And to be fair, that's not even really what's happening at the secondary level, right? Students move from class to class. They have breaks throughout the day. Teachers have breaks throughout the day. So it's not a continuous 6.5 hours of sort of sitting glued to your screen trying to watch a teacher. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So I'm not sure who could answer this, but can you describe what mask and movement breaks might look like throughout the day?
Sure. I think this is going to depend upon the level, what that might look like. Obviously, we are encouraging outdoor space, so that's a perfect opportunity when students or teachers are able to take kids out to do a mask break. When students are eating lunch, obviously that's a time that their masks are removed. And simply, educating kids about when they're feeling like they need a break. It could be as simple as a kid could step out in the hall and take their mask off for a minute and, kind of take a breather, or particularly if it's hot out or something, or they're feeling a little warm. So I don't think it has to be, these scheduled big events. I think that we work with kids and they know when's an appropriate time. Those breaks could be done as part of a classroom activity, or they could be done individually. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that breaks can be built into the day, reasonable, and they don't have to be, like I said, a big scheduled event.
Okay, I have a question for Joanne, and I don't know if you can answer this, but if a student is ordered to quarantine by the Department of Health because of exposure, is the rest of the family expected to quarantine as well?
The Department of Health would make that determination. Most likely it would be yes, as they would meet the criteria of being a close contact to the student. So, but again, they are the ones who issue orders of quarantine and confinement. So they would provide direction to the family, and you would be in communication with them, and as well as with your healthcare provider.
Okay. I have a question about the phased reentry. Does the plan for the first 2 weeks, does it include special ed students so they are also virtual on those days? Oh, you're muted, Jody.
The first 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, the 9th, 10th, and 11th, all students are virtual. So special education students would be virtual, as well as the ENL students. And then the following week, when we start bringing in students, they would follow that same schedule for the first couple of days. And then Wednesday, when we have K6 on site every day, that's when the special education students and ENL students would all start that schedule as well.
Okay. Has the elementary curriculum been adjusted to account for learning gaps from the conclusion of the last academic year?
Yes, either Dave or Laura, maybe you want to address some of the work we've been doing over the summer?
I'll start and then Laura can pick up. So yes, we've had groups of teachers working this summer on not only sort of, more importantly than addressing the curricular gaps from last year, because those can all be accelerated through the work that we do this year. It's really taking a look at where we start this year and making sure that we have a solid prioritized curriculum so that students are able to not only fill in any gaps they might have, but not fall further behind, right? You can't spend a lot of time filling gaps because then you just kind of perpetuate the falling behind because you're filling prior gaps, but you're not also continuing to move along at the same time. So it's sort of a two-pronged approach to the curriculum we've taken this summer. It's really, while yes, gaps need to be filled, we also have to have a clear focus on being able to accelerate students forward so that they don't further fall behind if that indeed was the case. Because you still want students to be at or above grade level in the standards as we progress forward.
And I'll just add, I know a lot of parents are very concerned. I've had a number of parents reach out to me expressing concern that their child's fallen behind. Just remember that everybody was in the same boat. And yes, it was more challenging for some students than others with the remote learning, but our teachers are very aware. And the first thing we're going to be doing is welcoming our students back and making sure they feel safe and secure and comfortable here at school. And then we're going to be doing some assessing, as our elementary teachers are quite adept at doing, to figure out where the students are and where they need to go. So please, we understand you're stressed about it, but it will be okay.
I have a couple of questions that have to do with sports. So if a student is in remote learning only and cannot participate in at-school activities, does that include sports?
It does.
Okay. Another question. If there are no sports and my son had physical education exemption, will he now have to add PE into his schedule?
We talked about that briefly, but I haven't been involved in further conversation. I don't know if Dave Hurst or Dave Domel, have you spoken with this PE about that?
Yeah, I think there's Mr. Powers. In fact, I actually saw that question here and I already had sent him an email. We had discussed this. We were hoping, obviously, that there's the ability to play sports, but if that's not a possibility, or if something happens mid-season, we would address that. But if all of a sudden they come out, NISFA comes out and tells us that there's no sports completely in the fall, we believe that we were leaning in the direction of having to put students into a phys ed class.
Okay, so we've had several questions about what band and choir might look like, sort of at all levels. So would you be able to answer that?
Sure. And then if the principals want to add anything related to their specific building. So obviously 12-foot distancing does create a lot of challenges. In speaking with our school physician, he feels that 12-foot distancing outside with choir or band is relatively safe. He definitely does have concerns about even 12 feet inside with choir and band being a concern. So he has reached out to the Department of Health about where that guidance came from. With the 12-foot distancing, though, regardless, if we're able to have band or some level of choir, I know the choir teachers are planning to begin, if they're inside, with not singing. I think that's the plan across the board. With band, obviously, you would be looking at very small groups of students at the elementary and, when possible, at the middle school who are already in cohorts together. But again, I think that we are looking to utilize outdoor space at the beginning of the year when the weather's conducive. But there is some questions about doing those activities even with 12-foot distancing inside is a concern.
And just for elementary choir, we're not going to be starting the year with choir. We can't pull 2 to 5 different sections of a grade level together in one space. So it's just unfortunately not possible.
Right.
Okay, and maybe you may have covered this in talking about the phased reentry, but can you explain what the goal or purpose of everyone starting remotely in that first week, Wednesday through Friday, and then for a day in the following week? What is the rationale for that?
So the rationale is to get our staff back in, to make sure our staff feel confident with some of the new technology that we're asking. The biggest priority really is to ensure that students have the knowledge that they need when they do return to campus to meet some of the health and safety requirements that are in place, which are much different than when students left our school buildings. So we plan to, again, I think I mentioned, talk with students about social distancing. How does that look? We just had the question about what do the hallways in the high school look like, giving them some visuals. What does the classroom look like? All of those things, the requirements and why it's necessary for face coverings to give students some of those skills. And certainly, the general introduction to the classes and what things are going to look like. But to make sure that we are planning safely and making sure students feel comfortable. This is also a great time where our counselors can be reaching out to students who or families who have indicated their students are struggling with a return to school with some of the things that are in place. So we feel like those few days will give us the opportunity to do that. And it does still give the elementary time for parents to have students come to the buildings and drop off their supplies, meet their teachers, those kinds of things. So.
Okay. So this is a question, I guess, for the middle school, but maybe it applies for all. How will you handle special education students at the middle school who are not in the skills class? Kids who have a 5-in-1 aid and resource room. How would this work on when they're doing remote learning? Will IEPs be changed to reflect the new way of teaching?
So students who are in resource room would follow the alternate day schedule. They would still, if they're scheduled in resource room period 4, let's say, on the day that they're here, they would receive instruction on site with their teacher. On the day that they're home, they would log in during that same time and still receive instruction from their teacher. I don't think there's anything unique, is there, Mike, with the middle school that would change that?
No, the other additional support that could be provided is during students' home base, they could connect with their aide if they needed support for any of their academic classes in addition. And they would do that virtually, so they could do that through a Google Meet. We actually had aides do that pretty frequently in the springtime.
Right, good point.
So there are some concerns among some kindergarten families who submitted questions about the requirements for face coverings, and will kindergarten students, be required to wear the face coverings throughout the day?
Yes, unless they're not medically able to tolerate it for some reason. I mean, the CDC guidance does indicate, I think, Joanne, correct me if I'm wrong, above age 2. And I know our school physician has indicated that, that he has kids in his office very young who wear face coverings and are very tolerant of them.
That's correct, yes. I think along with the guidance that we're looking to provide families on face coverings, we'll provide some additional information. CDC has a family checklist that will help parents in preparing their children to wear masks. There's also some wonderful resources through the American Academy of Pediatrics and some other professional organizations, and having parents help their children wear masks, wear face coverings around the house, practice them, do different tasks with them teach them how to do it, have them become familiar with doing it at home. Very much like how you taught your child to put on a seatbelt, or how you taught them to wear a helmet for safety reasons, that they start to learn to, this is another safety measure that I can do to keep myself healthy and safe. So there's some links that we'll provide to parents that might help you in working with them in the next few weeks prior to school starting. And the teachers will reinforce that as well. So.
And I've seen recently some good resources as well to try and make it fun, to find things that kids have an interest in, and see if you can find masks or make masks that reflect that. So there's lots of kind of creative ways that this can be a more, normal thing, for lack of a better term, for all of us.
Okay, for middle and high school students who will be in school, will they have a locker? And if not, do they have a place to put their coats or supplies or books, or do they have to carry their items all day?
So Mike or Dave, do you want to take that?
So the middle school has never traditionally allowed backpacks. We will be this year, because students will not be allowed to use lockers. There's no way that we can create a socially distanced paradigm for students and keep them apart. So they'll carry all their supplies in their backpacks. If we get to such a time where they need coats, we hope that we may be in a time period where we can open up and use lockers. If not, they may have to put them either in their homerooms, or we may have to stagger when they can go to their lockers.
Yeah, that's something, obviously at some point they are going to need coats. At the high school, a lot of the students don't use their lockers to begin with. We're going to minimize, obviously, what the students have in terms of supplies. So their bag, they do carry their bags traditionally at the high school. So they should be able to get their belongings from class to class. And then, at some point later on in the year, if we feel the need that students need access to their lockers, we'll create some sort of a plan where we can stagger them visiting their lockers during the day.
Okay. I have a transportation question. Will there be monitors on the bus to ensure that students are following protocol regarding mask coverings and staying in their seats?
So monitors on the bus are only assigned to buses where students have IEP needs that require that. To be honest, we probably couldn't even find enough people to do those positions if we had to try and find someone for every bus. But there will be reduced numbers of students on the buses, which should be helpful, so that the driver the driver has to pay attention to the road. And even if there was a bus monitor on there, they don't get up and walk around the bus when the bus is in motion regardless. So there are limitations as to, if a student sits down and takes off their face coverings, even with a monitor on the bus, it would be very difficult to address that appropriately. With one student, unless it's a family member in seats, that will hopefully reduce any risk if a child does, lower their face covering while on the buses.
Okay. How will the release of students midday for doctor's appointments, et cetera, be handled?
So if a child does need to go to a doctor's appointment, that's fine. We understand appointments have to happen during the school day. We would just ask that, depending on the level, the parent would notify the school building and the student would be released, but we would do it outside. So the parent would not have to come into the building to pick up their child. So each building will have similar procedures, but depending upon where the main office is located and pickup is, it might vary a little bit, but each building would be providing parents with more specific information about that as we get closer to the school year.
Okay. And at every level, will there be widespread opportunities to use the outdoors for classroom instruction?
Sure, although we live in the Northeast, so we all know that time will be limited unless we hopefully have a very warm fall, which would be great. But yes, we are looking at utilizing some different spaces. We are looking, I said, at purchasing tents so there'll be covered areas. So even if it's a little drizzly out, there will be a space that students and staff can go outside. And I don't know if maybe Mike or Dave, you want to talk about the Wi-Fi access we're looking at, even at the high school or middle school levels for outside.
Yeah, sure. Mr. Nardelli has helped us out, and he's putting some Wi-Fi extenders in certain locations along the outside areas, especially at the football stadium. We can use both sides of the bleachers to maximize space out there for classes. So there's that area. There's courtyards that we can use that we're planning on using that do actually still get good Wi-Fi out there in those areas. So I think we have I made a list for the teachers, and there's 8 to 10 areas that can accommodate sometimes 3 to 4 classes in the square footage that are close enough to Wi-Fi where they could have their students in person and still be broadcasting to the students at home. So we have those set up and established.
Same. We have 3 hotspots that we'll be establishing in the next month or so that if teachers decide to take students out of doors, they'll be able to, not only teachers get online, but the students will as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Would the district consider supplementing online instruction for K-5 students in the remote option with worksheets or textbooks so kids are not doing 100% of their work online?
Dave, do you want to address that?
So students will still have access to their textbooks and workbooks. So if that's an option that parents would like to utilize, and obviously they can.
Okay, and I believe this was answered in the Q&A, but let me just pose this question: how will you adhere to student confidentiality through a live stream model or remote learning?
Yeah, so FERPA, which is the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, does protect live streaming of content, so long as personally identifiable information is not discussed within that setting, which is no different than when you're in a brick and mortar setting. You can't discuss in front of the whole class, say a student's grade or other personally identifiable information. Those same thresholds hold true whether you're in person or remote. Back in March, the federal government actually issued guiding documents to sort of explain FERPA in a virtual world, and it is absolutely okay to live stream. It's no different than classrooms also, having visitors pop in, right? They're not members of the class, but yet they can see what's going on in that classroom. So streaming to someone's home, if a parent walks by and happens to see the lecture, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that per FERPA regulations.
Okay. For students in the alternating schedule every other day, had there been consideration of doing every other week rather than every other day?
Yeah, that came up. We talked about students, the benefits, pros, cons of both. I think the challenge with every other week is that's a long time to not have face-to-face contact with students, and especially we talk about students who struggle with an online platform. We're talking about students in grades 7 through 12, that the 7th graders are still pretty young. To not be in school for a week, we felt was just too long of a period of time. In addition to the fact that 7 through 12 are not scheduled in cohorts, so they are moving around the building. When our school physician weighed in on that, he really didn't see a big difference between doing alternating days or alternating weeks, aside from the fact that, it could present a little more challenge for contact tracing. He didn't see that as any more of a risk alternating days versus alternating weeks. So we felt that the instructional value, the social emotional value of seeing kids every other day was important for us.
Okay. I have a question. If families travel out of state prior to Labor Day, are they expected to quarantine for 2 weeks before starting school?
If they travel to one of the states that is on the list that has to quarantine, which is becoming bigger every day, then yes, they would have to quarantine for those first 2 weeks.
Okay. Will parents who are thinking about whether or not to drive their kids be able to get information about how many kids are on their child's assigned bus route?
Well, in general, I mean, we are planning right now about 50% capacity. So that's the general rule, I guess. There could be some that, are a few kids less or, a couple more, but that's the guidance we have to follow. Certainly a parent can always call transportation. Right now, we don't have all the routing done and we don't know how many families are going to actually take the buses. So I know transportation would not have that information ready right now. But as the school year begins, they should have that. But in general, following the DOH guidance, you could expect, a similar number of students on all of, the same size buses. Obviously, you have different size buses.
Okay, I have a question. What is the protocol for a teacher or staff member who was exposed to someone with COVID or has a positive COVID test? Will the school be active in getting a substitute teacher for the grade level, special, or subject? Or does this scenario disrupt school as a whole?
Joanne, maybe you can talk about the exposure or that piece of it, and I could talk about the sub piece of it.
Yeah, I'm just going back to what we discussed earlier. I mean, the individual would be home, and there would be guidance as far as from the health department about the return to school after the illness or after, the individual is again, from the guidance from the Department of Health as far as based on their test results and the quarantine when they would be able to return. The guidance regarding from CDC, there's been some updates to it as far as the system-based criteria. It's been modified, but we have that guidance outlined in the reopening plan. So you would follow that, and you would have. I guess I'm trying to understand the question. Really, sounds like to me it's more academic as far as the follow-up goes with what they're receiving at home with instruction. Is that correct, or?
And I think it has to do with how a substitute teachers would be assigned. So, and I apologize because I read it and I didn't quite understand, but I think there have been a couple of other questions regarding whether or not there'll be substitute teachers sort of assigned to a building or assigned to a grade level.
So we have the substitute plan would be similar to what we have in the past, where we do use the BCSD subsystem. We do anticipate that there will be, just like there has been the last couple of years, less subs available. So we are planning to, we would certainly look to get a sub. It may involve shifting some staff, which we've done at times in the past as well. But we would make sure that there's supervision and a sub in place. The other, possibility could be that if a teacher is exposed in quarantine, or if they're positive but still able to work from home, we could look at potentially if the teacher is able to teach from home with some kind of supervision on site when we have the hybrid model. That could be an option. Again, each situation really would have to be different.
Okay. Joanne, back to you. Are kids and staff required to submit a negative COVID test prior to the start of the school year?
No, they are not. Currently, the guidance that SED's, New York State Education Department says that we should follow is that we comply with the CDC guidance and not conduct or require individuals to have COVID-19 testing. That's the current guidance. The decision for any type of testing will be, again, determined by a child's healthcare provider or the local Department of Health. It is a little bit confusing, I think, because there is a New York State's reopening plan for higher education for colleges and universities does recommend testing within a 14-day window before arriving on campus, and then if feasible, retest individuals 7 to 14 days after arrival. So I think there's some confusion as to what we could do at this point, but right now we are being told by state ed to comply with CDC guidance and not require that for K-12 instruction for September.
Okay. I'm going to read a couple of more questions, and then the rest will be available on the website. We're compiling all of our questions that were emailed to us, along with all the questions submitted in these Q&A sessions. So they will be available on the website by the end of the week. But I have a couple more, and I know this was covered, but I want to ask it anyway. What will parents be required to do to complete the daily questionnaire? Will parents need to take a child's temperature every day before school? She says she apologizes if she missed that, but I think it certainly bears repeating.
Yeah, the screening does involve daily temperature checks, and there's a series of questions, I think 5 questions, that you have to respond to that are part of the CDC guidance for health screenings. Literally, I do it every day before I come to work. It takes about 20 seconds. It's very quick. And with an app that we're looking at, we're looking for it to be very easy for students, for our families and for our staff. So it would be a daily temperature check with a response to a few questions that need to be answered.
Okay, and finally, and I don't know if anyone can actually speak to this, but why can't remote learners participate in sports if sports are permitted?
One, because the remote option is due to health and safety concerns, and to not feel comfortable or not be able to be on site. And then be able to come for after school sports. One, it could be a problem with contact tracing. And it would also be a problem for us to keep track of students in general. So if a parent or family opts for remote learning, then the after school activities are not an option during that remote learning period.
I'm just going to ask a couple of questions just about Chromebooks. How will students receive Chromebooks prior to the beginning of the school year if they're going to be in remote learning? And will students who previously had not had a stylus for the Chromebooks get one for this year?
We will be scheduling pickup times for all students to get Chromebooks. They'll be done at the building level, similar to the spring. In styluses, I don't know if Dave or Ray can answer the stylus question.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if you're going to get a Chromebook from the high school, for example, the 9th graders, they are going to be getting a stylus with that, correct?
Same at the middle school.
Okay. Thanks. Is that it, Joellen?
I have one more. Just, is New York State requiring lockdown drills during COVID?
Yes, they are. But the guidance is that during the lockdown, students can pretty much remain at their seats, and we would just tell them what they should do in the event of having to do a lockdown. And evacuation drills as well are still required.
Okay. Now we do have some additional questions, but there are quite a few. So what do you think? Do you want to take a few minutes to answer a few more?
Yeah, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. If there's a couple more maybe that we can respond to, and then we'll include the rest in the FAQ.
Okay, sounds good. So here are just a couple of more. Will the first 3 days of virtual learning be all day?
Yes. I mean, we certainly wouldn't be having kids on their screens, from 8 in the morning till 3:30, but there would be instruction happening during those days. And we would have kind of, as I mentioned before, planned for instruction on health and safety protocols that we want to make sure students are informed of.
Okay. And this was specific to kindergartners. This parent was wondering about, kindergarten students in that virtual learning environment.
Yeah, we would not ask kindergarten students to be online all day long. We'll have a schedule in place for that.
Okay. And here's a question I don't think you can answer, but I'm going to ask it, and this will be the last one. Has the state considered, adding an extra year, semester, et cetera, to help close the gap anticipated in student learning during the pandemic?
No. And I don't anticipate a change with that.
Okay. All right. I think the rest we'll probably have to include in our website FAQ.
Okay. So I just want to conclude by thanking my colleagues who are here today. We've been answering a lot of these questions the last week or so. I'd also like to thank all the families who are participating and who have been involved in supporting all of our efforts. We know these are challenging times, and certainly, you want to make the best decisions for your children and your family. So if you have further questions, if we have further information, which I'm sure we will get updated guidance, pretty much daily. We will be sure to share it with you. So I just want to thank everyone for your time and your continued support, and have a good evening.